A recent column by Malaika Mahlatsi reflects on the devastating impact modern warfare continues to have on children and civilians, particularly in conflicts involving major global powers. The article raises questions about accountability, international law, and the moral responsibility of the international community. A very good morning to you, Malaika, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me. Good morning to your viewers as well.
Just to begin with, can we speak about the continued aggression of this tag team of the United States and Israel?
You know, I think like many other people in the world, I wake up every day, and in fact, even before I go to sleep at night, and I'm following the development of what's happening in Iran and the Middle East broadly. And I cannot help but think that, we are here in this situation that we find ourselves in because for a very long time, both the apartheid state of Israel and the United States have been allowed for very many decades now to get away with violating international law, to get away with very violent and aggressive military action in other parts of the world. And what we are seeing in Iran now is not an aberration. It's in fact a logical conclusion of what happens when the world sits back and allows two big superpower, big imperial nations and an apartheid nation to continue with the violence that it has been doing for over many years. Israel, right now, where it is, believes that it is a country that cannot be touched. And it has every reason to believe that because it has a reference in history. Because the aggression that we are seeing that is being facilitated by the apartheid state of Israel is not new. It has been happening since 1948. And since 1948, the world has not responded adequately. The same is true about the United States. Its invasive, its colonial and imperial aggression has been a defining feature of its existence. And because the world has done nothing, we find ourselves in this situation that we are in today.
Mm, yeah. Your article highlights how children often become the greatest casualties of war. Why do you think this continues despite the international humanitarian law? And like you've mentioned, from 1948, they've done so, and the world hasn't held them accountable. But most importantly, children are always the casualties of war.
The reality of the situation is that despite claims by diplomatic communities and despite claims by global movements for peace, the logic of might is right has always been what we have seen happening. The United States of America is not a signatory to the Rome Statute, right? The apartheid state of Israel has signed on to the Geneva Conventions, but has refused to ratify key articles there that would hold it accountable for its invasion and illegal occupation of Palestinian territories. And so the reality of the situation is that international law fails because the people whom international law is supposed to be holding accountable can unilaterally decide to not be part of conventions and agreements that would hold them accountable. You saw, for example, the case with the kidnapping and the aggression of the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, by the Trump administration. Not a single instrument of law could do anything. But you must also remember that the United States is a permanent member and has veto power in the United States Security Council. And so any attempts at reforming international law, any attempts at implementing demands of the United Nations, or even taking seriously anything that happens in the United Nations General Assembly, are always going to be thwarted by the United States veto power. And we have seen that happening with the genocide in Palestine, that even when the entire world had agreed that this is indeed a genocide and more intervention needs to happen, at every point, the buck would stop, or any progress would stop at the level of the United Nations Security Council, because the United States has got veto power. And with their very problematic, violent, and psychopathic relationship between the United States and the apartheid state of Israel, the implications are that for the rest of, for the rest of this foreseeable future, we are going to have two nations that bully the world, backing each other, even at the law, at the level of institutions that are, tasked with protecting international law. And I think it really is an indication to us about some of the limitations and the failures of multilateral institutions, but also the failures of international law that is largely voluntary. Because when the United States decides that it no longer wants to be part of any conventions, any frameworks, any agreements, it gives it carte blanche to really undo the work of other nations that are working towards peace, whether this is in the case of wars across the world, or in the case of issues around climate justice. When the United States pulls out, it becomes lawless, and there's no one who is able to hold it to account. And I think that is something that really, forces us to reflect deeply on what are really the limitations of these multilateral institutions that we have so held to high regard as instruments that could protect. We have seen their failures and limitations in Gaza. We are seeing their failures and limitations in Iran. And I think that it is a moment for us as the world, and particularly for the global South, to think very seriously about the kinds of reforms that are required in these institutions.
Yeah, I'm just listening to you speaking about, the multilateralism. And I'm just thinking this year is the year in which the United States hosts the G20, which is a
Mm.
platform that is meant to bring together, diplomacy, multilateralism, geopolitics. Last year, when we hosted the G20, the slogan was solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And clearly there's no solidarity on the other end. How is it that a country such as the United States, hosting such an important global event, continues to do what it does and without any regret? What do we take away from this?
We take away from this that solidarity is a we take away from this that solidarity is a continuous and consistent act that especially the global South must continue to pursue, because we cannot rely on the solidarity and the compassion of the global North. And I speak about the global North broadly, and particularly the European Union, and the allies of the United States, because throughout the war and the ongoing war in Palestine, these allies of the United States, and particularly the governments, even though the people have tried to fight, but particularly the governments, have remained steadily on the side, and had for a very long time. A few have deviated now, but by and large, they have remained on the side of the United States. They have remained on the side of the United States when they have seen unimaginable aggression, violence, and suffering that the children of Palestine, the children of Syria and Lebanon, and many other countries across the Middle East have been subjected to by the apartheid state of Israel in alliance with the United States. These other allies have also been part of that, right? The European Union has been part of that. They have hosted military camps for the United States. They have openly demonstrated and declared their support. They have sanctioned whoever the United States has sought them to sanction. They have been complicit in this, right, in Gaza, and they largely remain so in Iran, because they are allowing the United States to continue with this on the basis that they will provide the support that is necessary. And some of this support, as we saw in Gaza, in Palestine broadly, is active support. It's not simply support of we stand by you, but we are on your side. It's support of providing weaponry and arms. It's support of legitimizing and justifying and giving basis for the continuation of the war. But we saw this as well with the case of the abduction of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. Countries like France, your United Kingdom, and many others across the European Union took a public stance to say that they effectively agree with the actions of the American government, actions that were unlawful by American domestic law, but unlawful by international law as well. And so what we have seen over the past few years, and in fact the past decades, is that when it comes to issues when it comes to solidarity, solidarity is a function of alliances, and alliances of the United States, allies of the United States, are always going to be on the side, and historically been on the side of the United States. And so it becomes incumbent upon us in the global South, with all our differences, right, and political histories, we do share, above all else, a common aspiration for a world in which we are not led with the philosophy of might is right. And thus, it becomes quite incumbent upon us to continue with our work of solidarity, to continue, even us as citizens in the global south, holding our governments accountable and demanding of them the solidarity that South Africa has demonstrated towards the people of Palestine, to insist that that extends even beyond the people of Palestine to all the oppressed people of the world, to all nations of the world that are on the receiving end of the imperial ambitions of the United States and its allies, and certainly of the apartheid state of Israel.
Yeah. I'm just going to take an extract from the column in which you wrote. And by the way, I'm a fan of your writing. Very beautiful. You have a thing
Thank
with the pen.
you.
So you say that the truth is that children are targeted in these wars because the ultimate objective of the Zionist regime is to ethnically cleanse the Middle East of Arabs and other indigenous people. Can you kindly unpack what this actually means and the core of this for us?
So on the 28th of February 2026, when the apartheid state of Israel and the United States facilitated joint military strikes in Iran, one of the first targets that they hit was a school in Minab, which is about 114, 1,400 kilometers south of Tehran, the capital city and the seat of government. And this happened on the day that the late supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, was killed. Now, over the years, and even throughout this war, the United States and the apartheid state of Israel have laid claims to the argument that they have got superior technology and superior weaponry that can hit their targets directly, right? The weaponry is so sophisticated, it can hit targets directly. If we are to take that logic, and indeed we can say that that logic is true because we have seen these same operations happening in the Caribbean Sea, where boats are hit directly from far up in the sky, and at times from even thousands of kilometers away. The precision cannot be debated. And so if we are to agree that there is precision in the way and that the weapons and the fire is being directed, when you then have a situation in which one of the first targets that is hit in the middle of the war is a school of 7 to 15-year-old girls, the logical conclusion is that this was a deliberate attack. The precision was not off, it was intentional. And even if we were to want to entertain the argument or the idea, right, the false idea that this was some kind of mistake, Tehran is 1,400 kilometers away from where Sharjah School of Girls was hit. 1,400 kilometers in a terrain that is very complex, a terrain that is not smooth. There is no possibility that this ammunition that is able to hit these missiles that are very clearly directed and very precise could have hit a school there by mistake. And so it was intentional. And we also know and can use history as a reference that the apartheid state of Israel uses the apartheid of Israel targets schools, targets children, because we've got evidence, not just in Palestine, in Gaza, but also in Lebanon, right? Some of the worst single strike events that we have seen since 2023 October in Palestine has been on schools that are occupied by children. This started from the very first month of the war, that the first targets were in fact schools. In fact, the United Nations and other humanitarian and international organizations report that 95% of schools in Gaza City and across, have in fact been destroyed. In Palestine, 95% of schools have been destroyed. And this has always been the intention of the Zionist regime in Israel. And we know it's the intention because it didn't just happen in Iran, it didn't just happen in Gaza, it happened in Lebanon as well. Buses in Lebanon were being directly targeted, school buses carrying children were being directed were intentionally being struck and were being hit. And we will not accept the argument that they wanted to perpetuate in Gaza, that schools are being targeted because they are hiding so-called terrorists, right? Because we know that that is not true. We know that every argument that is where so-called terrorists have been hidden were all proven to be false. We know that when buses of school children were being struck in Lebanon, it was not because there was any indication that there was Hezbollah or anybody else who was in those buses. There was always clear indication that there were children in there. And so I argue that what we're seeing as a pattern from Gaza to Lebanon to Syria to Iran now, what we are seeing here is a pattern of deliberate strikes and actions that are intended at children. It is not an accident of history that almost half of those who have been killed, of the 73,000 who have been killed in Palestine, have been children. Now, if you are even going to argue and say, you thought that for you to think, if you were telling me about 1, 2, 3, 5 children, that might be argued to be collateral damage. Over 40,000 children is not collateral damage. It's intentional, it is deliberate. And the same thing in Iran, when that girls' school was struck, the intention was to instill unimaginable fear in the hearts of the people of Iran. It was intentional because the apartheid of Israel does not go into these wars for regime change. Israel does not go into these wars for regime change, and we must be clear about that. The apartheid of Israel goes into these wars across the Middle East with the intention and the sole intention of exterminating populations of its neighboring countries. It wants to exterminate Palestine, and we know that because it does not end simply. The aggression and the violence of the apartheid state of Israel do not end when it has killed people. It continues with raising their country to its very foundation. It continues with continued illegal occupation and illegal building of illegal settlements. And so it's clear, kill them, exterminate them, erase them from the face of the world. Then you take over their land and you expand the territory of Israel. We saw it in Lebanon. We saw it here. We are seeing it everywhere across the Middle East. We must not fall into the false argument that we are being dragged in, that the problem here is about regime change. Across various regimes that have come in throughout the Middle East, the same tactics of war, the same Machiavellian tactics of the apartheid state of Israel have persisted. And it is clear even in the case of South Africa, as we put it across in the International Court of Justice, that the issue here is about a genocide. The aim of a genocide is not to change a regime. The aim of a genocide is to exterminate a population, to cleanse them, and to ensure the erasure of their existence. And that is exactly what is happening. And that is exactly how Israel fights in the Middle East. And I just wanted to really put an emphasis to that when we read and we engage with the news media everywhere, and we keep hearing this noise about regime change, that may very well be the aim of the Americans, right? And it's possible that two allies can come together and still have different objectives. It may very well be that America wants the oil, wants whatever it wants out of that. But certainly for the apartheid state of Israel, the objective is not simply to remove the supreme leader. It was not to remove the supreme leader. It is not to remove any of the Islamic Republic leaders and institutions. It is to exterminate the people of Iran, as it was in Palestine, as it is in Lebanon, as it was in Syria, and as it was in Yemen as well.
No, thank you so much for that. There's just a lot going on, and just the way you unpacked it. Thank you for that, and I hope that our listeners and viewers have caught sight in the gravity and the depth of this issue. But before we let you go, we just need to jump into an ad break. There's a question that I want you to respond to that you had mentioned, the global North and South.
Yes.
So I just want to get your views on that. But if you'd indulge us, we just need to go into an ad break. We'll see you.
Second.
Thank you.
More than 800 million people around the world live in deep poverty, uncertain of where the next meal will come from. For those on the brink of starvation, a food pact means survival, dignity, and hope. Send food, send kindness. Be the reason a family does not go hungry. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
Valley's Motor Spares. We supply motor spares and accessories for all makes and models of motor cars, LDVs, bakkies, trucks, and earth-moving equipment. We deliver on time, every time. Please contact us via WhatsApp on 014-592-0925 or call 014-592-0925 or visit 28 Zenderling Street, Rustenburg. Remember the name, Valley's Motor Spares.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042 203 1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
Dad, these Frymax chips are so tasty. Wow, that really takes me back. My dad bought me a Frymax chips every day after school. They were my favorite when I was your age as well. Quality is at the very heart of what we do, and that's why we ensure that every Frymax packet is filled with the beautiful goodness and flavor-packed taste that you've come to expect from us since 1982. Frymax, from generation to generation.
This Ramadan, as we prepare to break our fast, spare a thought for the millions of families around the world who have nothing on their tables. You can change that. For many, you are their hope. For just 1,590 Rand, you can provide a Ramadan food parcel to feed a family of 5 for the entire month. Help Muslim Hands continue serving humanity. Give your zakat and sadaqah at muslimhands.org.za.
Elite Basmati, available throughout the Middle East, and now for the very first time exclusive to South Africa. Brought to you by Murchison Spice, Peter Marisburg's most famous specialty store. Elite Basmati, available in aromatic white and golden cellar, is packaged in a world-class facility in India and is filled with wholesome goodness for your well-being. Elite Basmati rice by Murchison Spice. For trade inquiries, contact Mohammed on 033 387 2121. Murchison Spice.
Salam Media, your spiritual companion this Ramadan.
We're here with Malaika Mahlatsi, who is reflecting on the devastating impact of warfare. And just before we went into the ad break, Malaika, I just wanted to get from you, I think for the longest time, there has been this propaganda with regards to conflict in the Middle East, more especially when it comes to Palestine, that this was a religious war. And it's a Muslim struggle. And I'm so glad that over the past decade, we've seen voices outside of the religious, outside of the religion, advocating and speaking about the humanitarian crisis and demystifying and debunking this thing to say that this is a religious war, which is what you've just mentioned, you know, when you're speaking about the regime change, ethnic cleansing, to what it actually is. You spoke about the global South having to unite and, you know, speaking about the unity of the global North. Do you think that we will ever achieve such unity as the global South? And I want us to separate the people in the global South versus the governments in the global South. Will we ever find ourselves in a position where we are as united as the global North to actually tackle these issues head on?
Look, I mean, I think that, for example, if you look at the global South solidarity on the question of Palestine, you look at the patterns of the votes in the United Nations General Assembly, but you look at the mass action that has happened in the global South, in countries like Indonesia, South Africa, Brazil, Bolivia, and so on and so forth, right? When you see the amount of support that the people in this region of the world have been able to demonstrate, you recognize that there is a great sense of a feeling and a sense of injustice that is happening to Palestinian people and the need for solidarity. And I think this is largely in part because one of the key features, the global South, we've got different politics, we've got different, many things about us are different, but one of the things that we do have in common is a history and an experience of colonial oppression and colonial violence and imperial devastation that has been visited upon our countries at different times in history and continuing into the modern age. And so I think, if you speak to an ordinary South African, like myself, for example, my solidarity, my passion, my work, and my commitment to the Palestinian cause is largely rooted on my appreciation and understanding, not only of the idea that, the world can never be free for as long as we've got the people of Palestine who are still oppressed, but also from being a person born into a country that has experienced the violence and brutality of apartheid and colonialism. And so, merely by that sense of one common experience that I have with the people of Palestine, it roots itself, my solidarity roots itself in that. And I think in the global south, we see that largely. If you look at the countries that have got huge support, where the people come out in their millions and in their thousands in support of the Palestinian cause and have been over the years, are countries that themselves have known the violence and brutality of colonial conquest and imperial devastation. Whether you're talking about the experience of Brazil, native Brazilian people with Portuguese colonizers, you're speaking about, parts of, across many parts of the African continent, we all know colonialism. And because we all know that, I think the spirit of the people of the global south is always going to be at the center of that solidarity. What our governments do and choose not to do is another question altogether. But history has also demonstrated that governments and the policies that they take are also largely shaped by the people in the countries that they lead. There are many examples that we have seen where countries have gone out to say some very problematic things. And I mean, I think even in the global north, you see this, right? The Palestinian solidarity movement has also been quite large in the global north. So even as governments have sought to maintain alliances with the apartheid state of Israel and with the imperial nation of the United States, ordinary people, citizens in those countries are coming to the fore and saying, not in our name. And I have to believe, as a scholar, as an activist, as a researcher, but as a person who exists in this world and the young person who's going to grow up in this world, I have to believe in the capacity of the level of work that we do on the ground, of the level of work that people do in the global south. I have to believe, and I do believe, that this work is going to pay off. In fact, if you even think about what you said earlier on, the change in the narrative around the aggression in the Middle East did not occur because of governments. It occurred because of ordinary people. It occurred because of journalists like those at Salam Media who are invested in truth, coming out to say, we are not going to allow our governments to continue to perpetuate these lies. We've got people in London and so on, people in New York and across the world who are saying, we are not going to allow our governments to continue to say these things, to continue to pledge solidarity with nations that are aggressors. And we are going to find and cement alternative narratives, right? For a very long time, when you read about the war in the Middle East, it was often framed, even the nomenclature, right? Even the language of this war historically has always been quite very problematic. People often spoke about the Israel and Palestine conflict, right? It took the work of activists across Palestine, activists across Turkey and many parts of the world to say, call this thing for what it is. This is not a conflict between two equals. This is a invasion by a colonizer occupying land of a colonized people. So an oppressed and oppressor cannot share the same level of responsibility, but you cannot call it a conflict when someone is colonizing and is invading. And you hear now in the language that we use, we don't speak about the conflict. We speak about the war, the aggression, the violence in the Middle East, merely by being able to name who is an aggressor, merely by being able to name who is a colonizer, is an indication of the shift in the thinking broadly of what the war in the Middle East is and what it represents. And so I do believe that, the unfortunate thing about all of this is that this is going to take time. It takes time. And in part because, the center of the economy, the economic center, even as the global south has 80% of the world's population and about 70% of the world's trade, it has not yet consolidated its economic strength in a manner that can extend solidarity beyond simply, government positions and even agreements by the people. I think what we need to see in the global south is our use of our financial and economic muscle to start to inform decisions of the world. Because this might is right idea that comes out of the US happens because the US still is a global economic dominant force. It happens because the petrodollar is still even as it is declining, it is still a very significant part of global trade and informs a lot of global trade and how the world engages with commerce. And I think it's time now that the global south starts to utilize its demographic strength, its economic strength, its trade strength to assert itself, right? To assert itself and to give practical demonstration to the solidarity that it extends. For example, the people of Palestine right now, the people of Iran are going to require the financial muscle of the world to help them rebuild. And it is my hope that, the global south is going to rise to the occasion, that the 70% of global trade that we do control is going to come into play when we start, when the conversation around practical solidarity finds expression. I don't think the global south has been very strong in terms of utilizing its economic strength to provide the necessary support, to provide the necessary infrastructure that is needed for countries that are under oppression, countries that are really facing the might of imperial devastation. And I think once we can get that particular aspect right, it's not going to be long after that we are going to be able to really, dislodge the world from the idea that, only the global north has the right and the moral authority to shape the direction of the world.
Yeah, and I hope that we live to actually see that day.
Yes.
Name the aggressor, name the colonizer, consolidate the economic demographic strength of the global south for solidarity. Invaluable insight there from Malaika Mahlatsi, who is a South African writer, commentator, and researcher at the University of Bayreuth in Germany. My apologies for that pronunciation.
Okay.
Malaika Mahlatsi was sharing her reflection on the human cost of war and global accountability. Thank you so much, Malaika.
Thank you very much, and thank you to your listeners for having me.
Thank you. We will now be taking a short ad break, and after this, we will be speaking to Member of Parliament Fasiya Hassan. Stay tuned.